Hello, and welcome back to the Gateways Podcast. Now, to begin this episode, I do want to address that as a result of networking issues, this episode did come out one day later than it was intended to, and my apologies. It will not happen in the future. So to begin, this episode will be about pitch, discussing pitch because it's the fundamental of virtually all music. If we didn't have pitch, then music would not exist. Now, before we can get into what exactly is pitch, we have to discuss the physics behind a pitch. Now, of course, we measure musical pitch in hertz, or you can measure it in cents if you're doing it relative to other pitches, but for today we're going to be discussing in hertz, because that's how we determine tuning systems. Now, the hertz is defined as 1 cycle per second, and, fun fact, the International Committee for Weights and Measures defined the second as the duration of 9,192,631,770 periods of the radiation corresponding to the transition between the two hyperfine levels of the ground state of the cesium-133 atom, adding that it follows that the hyperfine splitting in the ground state of the cesium-133 atom is exactly 9,192,631,770 hertz. Now, that sounds like a lot of, physics jargon, and it kind of is, because that was just the definition for what a second is, because the second is entirely arbitrary. The second was a concept invented by the human mind because time is not static. Now, hertz in terms of music is meant to demonstrate vibration. So sound travels in a longitudinal wave, which is an oscillation of pressure. We perceive this frequency of sound as pitch, and every musical note corresponds to a particular frequency which can be measured in hertz. Now, this is normally what's meant when you say something is tuned to, let's say, A440, which is standard tuning across the globe. And if you've ever heard before the essential musical flat earth theory known as A432, in that there are better frequencies when tuning A to 432. Now, first off, let's go over that myth just because it's interesting. So the 432 myth is that by detuning, it's the claim that our music today is being played through bad frequencies. Now, the way they say that this can be fixed is by tuning everything to A432, right? And why A42? Well, A432 is meant to go alongside something called the Schumann resonance. And the Schumann resonance is supposed to be the global electromagnetic resonances generated and excited by lighting discharges in the cavity formed by the Earth's surface. It's essentially the Earth's resonant frequency, and their claim is that through the use of this better tuning system, we will be more in line with Earth's frequencies and our music will be better. Now, the interesting thing is they mean this in terms of how it sounds to the ear. Now, if you detune something, it will sound warmer. This is a phenomenon. However, because they're demanding that it has to be better frequencies for the human ear, well, we don't determine whether or not something sounds nice based on its pitch alone. We judge it based on its relation to other pitches, right? Now, before I can go into this, let's just talk about what exactly is a pitch. And, well, a pitch is a sound's perceived frequency from low to high. And in Western music, we notate this using the note names A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. These are the notes that you'll traditionally see on a staff, any form of MIDI keyboard. They're what are used for tuning, etc. From A, if you continue increasing pitch through all letters to G, you start over again with A being an octave higher, with an octave being essentially double the rate of its lower counterpart. And then that would be considered part of a pitch class, whereas the note C and all of its octaves are part of a pitch class. Now, of course, if you look on a piano, what you normally start with something called middle C, and if you don't know where C is on a piano, it's there's a grouping of 3 white keys and 2 black keys between those 3 white. The first of that set of 3 is C, and from there it's D, C sharp slash D flat, D, D sharp slash E flat, E, F, F sharp, G flat, G, G sharp, A flat, A, B flat, A sharp, B, and then C again, which is its octave. So going off of that, the claims about A432 is that we have to change not only what we tune to, but also the system in which we use. And, that is a topic for another day, which will actually be discussed. But let's just say that shifting the current tuning system to the ones proposed by these individuals is not a wise decision, as at least with the music we play now, which they claim must be played through these better frequency relations, does not sound that good. But it's interesting to research, and I'll put some interesting resources for you to check out just to see it in the future. Now moving on from that, if you want to, you can open up the Harmony 1 book that I put in the resources in the Google Drive for this section. But I'm going to be talking about the staff, which is how in written score and composition we dictate what pitches are to be played. So first you have the staff, which is 5 lines, and it's what you utilize to provide visuals for someone who's performing your music. And depending on a note's position on the staff, you will be able to determine the pitch. And it descends from high pitch to low pitch as you go further down on the staff. And there are the two most common clefs, which are the F clef, or the bass clef, and the treble clef. Now, which one you'll be using is entirely dependent on the instrument. Piano uses both. Bass uses a bass clef. A lot of the time trumpet plays in treble clef, tuba will play in bass clef, etc., etc. Now, how do you read music on each of the clefs? Let's start with the bass clef. So on the bass clef you have your 5 lines. And you notice, if you look at an image of the bass clef, the position of F relative to the symbol for the bass clef, you'll see there are 2 points. These 2 points actually rest in the middle space above and below the ledger line, which are the 5 lines that F sits on. So F in the bass clef sits on the 4th line. Also, apologies, ledger lines are above and below, I just mean a line on the staff. So F is on the 4th line of the staff, and then from there you can figure out relatively, the space below that is E, the line below that space is D, space below that line is C, etc. Now you can do the same thing with the treble clef. If you look at the treble clef, the way it's commonly drawn on a staff, you'll notice that a kind of point that's drawn at the very end of the treble clef is on the 2nd line of the staff. That is how you know that note is G, because it's also known as the G clef. And from there you can figure out, above that's an A, above that's B, above that's C. Now, how do we move between these different pitches on a clef? Well, you move in what's called half steps and whole steps. So let's begin. What's a half step? Well, a half step is it's a movement between, if you're looking at piano, the white note and the black note directly next to it. Now, in terms of another form of measuring what the step is, you can judge it based on something known as cents, which is a unit of measure used for musical intervals, and our system divides each of the 12 semitones into 100 cents each. So that means if you ascend by 100 cents, you're ascending a single half step. You ascend by 200 cents, you're ascending a whole step. Now this is not going into just intonation and the way that the ear actually perceives this, because that's different and will be covered another day. It also won't be going to things like quarter tones or the like. But if you don't want to think of it in terms of a piano, which having in mind what a piano is like is actually very helpful for learning music theory. But if you don't want to do that, you can think of it in a more numerical sense with things like cents and hertz, etc. Now, of course, looking at pitch, every pitch within its own key has a certain feeling behind it, right? So there are, in our 12-tone system, there are a grand total of, let's do sound 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. No, it's 12 keys, so apologies. There are 12 total keys because it's 12-tone equal temperament. Now, the 12 keys, major, minor, there are 12 keys that you can play in, right? Now, the key defines what's known as the total center of the home, but we won't go over that just yet. We're just talking about pitches. So, if you start something on, let's say, C, because C major is the easiest key center to remember, because it's all the white notes on a keyboard, starting from C to its octave. If you're playing something in C major, then C is known as a tonic note, right? It's the note that you feel the most at home when you play it. Now, this will be brought up in more detail with chord structures in the next episode, which is tomorrow. But then, from there, every pitch you play is relative to C, because C is your tonal center, right? So, when you play the note C, it feels the most at home. It's the least... It's the note that's the most comfortable. Yeah, that's how you can describe it. It's the most comfortable note. The intervals between notes, however, are what make a piece of music sound the way it does. For example, the interval between C and G, which would be considered a perfect fifth, is 700 cents. If you think about it numerically, if you think about it on a piano, it's 7 half steps or 7 semitones. This is considered a perfect interval because it resolves incredibly nicely. It's a simple ratio of 3 to 2 in the human ear, and it has been found throughout virtually all musical cultures and tuning systems throughout history, which is why it's been deemed as perfect. And that would sound really pleasant, like the relation between those two pitches to our ears. Not playing them together, but separately. Like a transition between those two pitches would sound very good, ascending or descending. Now, if you take that concept and apply it to the note, which is a half sharp, not half sharp, it's a semitone below G, which would be F sharp. That sounds incredibly dissonant because its relation to its original note is not as simple, right? Because 3 to 2 is a very simple ratio, whereas this ratio, which is known as a tritone, is 600 cents or 6 semitones, right? Now, this means that the 12-tone system, which consists of 1200 cents or 12 semitones, is split perfectly in half. You expect that to sound a particular way, but if you think about it, you have the octave of your note, which is C. Its octave would be the C above, and its ratio would be 2 to 1, which is simple. But if you want to get, because it's a logarithmic system, if you want to get the middle, that means that the ratio of a tritone is the square root of 2 to 1, which is why it sounds so dissonant. Now, in certain scenarios it can be used, but if we're just talking about its relationship, it's so dissonant to the human ear because that ratio is it's not simple in the slightest, which, our ears don't really enjoy. So that's talking about like pitch relation to one another. But going back some more, talking more about the staff, I know, fun. We have to talk about accidentals, because accidentals are what let you determine whether a note is sharp or flat, etc. So again, this is in Harmony 1 again, just like the staff segment was. So looking at accidentals, you have, if we're in 12-tone equal temperament, so we're not in 24 equal temperament, which is different, quarter tone scale, interesting, we'll go over that later. If we're just talking about the 12-tone equal temper system, you have sharps and you have flats, right? So a sharp is a semitone above a note, and a flat is a semitone below that note, or 100 cents, as stated previously. On a piece of music, right? A flat is depicted as essentially a lowercase b, and a sharp is depicted differently. Although it's commonly referred to as a hashtag, that is not its actual name, even though a lot of people like to call it that. It's known as an octothorpe, but it's a hashtag. It's the thing you use to represent numbers. That's what a sharp looks like in musical notation. Now, depending on the instrument you're playing that sharp would look very different, but that's just how you understand it when it's written out on music sheets. Now, of course, the other thing you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about pitches is volume. Because the volume of the pitch you're playing can have a very big impact on, what you're trying to put across. Now, there are, of course, if you're using a digital audio workstation, I'd argue that there are a lot more options when it comes to, the amplitude of what you're producing, like the sound, because you can tune it to much more absolute values in terms of how loud it is, which can create some very interesting effects. But again, if we're looking at traditional music theory, normally it's split up into dynamics, which are pianissimo, piano, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, forte, and fortissimo. And what these represent are very soft, moderately loud, and very loud. There's also things like forte piano, which is loud then soft, and other dynamic markings. And, these are represented by specific letters, such as P for piano, MP for mezzo piano, mezzo forte is MF, and F is forte. And largely, these are up to the decision of the musician to decide how loud they are. They'll most likely base it off, relatively to the instruments that they're playing with. Like, if a trumpet's written in forte versus a flute being written in forte, their fortes would sound very different. Going back, this is a discussion about amplitude. Amplitude is very important in providing a certain feeling to your pitch, because how loud or quiet a pitch is, like in something like a melodic line, can carry a lot of force behind it. It can be very driving, it can be very mellow. It's entirely up to you. It's what you want for your piece. And then alongside this, you have things like crescendos and decrescendos in traditional music, or just like gradually getting louder or softer over time. These are commonly instrumented with tied or slurred lines in music, which are lines where multiple notes are connected, whether they be of the same pitch, which is a tie, or whether they be of different pitches, which is a slur. And these changes in volume will also have the similar impact to just determining what volume you're at, because shifting between different volumes is a very important part of designing your music, and without it, it wouldn't be as impactful as previously mentioned. Now, I know this particular episode is a little bit shorter than the introductory episode, and that's because in terms of discussing pitch, it's a little more difficult to continue to talk about it, just because it's a relatively simple concept when compared to the other facets of music theory. And I know this may not have been the most interesting one out of all of them, unless you're into things like different numerical systems and ratios and like vibrational frequencies. But, one, you have no assignment. And two, here's a little fun fact to end it off. So the resonant frequency of the human eyeball, which, yes, there is one, is about 19 hertz. Now, the lowest pitch that the human ear can discern is 20 hertz. So that means that this frequency is unable to be heard by the human ear. However, if you can produce a note with a subwoofer of 19 hertz, it will actually cause your eyes to vibrate, and this can lead to feelings of pressure, feelings of dread, auditory and visual hallucination, among other things. It's very interesting thinking about resonant frequency. I remember reading something on how Tesla had built a machine which he patented. I'm not exactly sure when, but he patented a machine which the story goes that he attached it to one of the supporting beams of his lab, and it nearly made the entire thing crumble, because the way it worked was it matched the vibrational frequency of the building he was in. And he claimed that this machine could destroy the Empire State Building because it could match its vibrational frequency. So, even though this concept of like pitches and vibrational frequency and hertz and like resonance, it may not seem all that interesting to like look into, it's actually pretty interesting. The physics and musical side of pitch, because in terms of music, the like pitches are like they're the basics, they're the building blocks of all the other more complex theory. But if you really like look into pitch and what exactly is a pitch in terms of things like the physical world, I'd argue it's pretty interesting. So thank you for tuning in. The next episode of this should be on the 30th of March, which would be tomorrow as of the day of this recording. And I will see you all next time.